Hello, everyone, and welcome to Choosify. This is the ultimate crowdsourced personal finance show, and we're really trying to own that catchphrase by making it truly interactive, trying to model a radio show. And we're piloting this for the next several weeks on Stereo, which is a new app that you can download in your iPhone or Android device of choice. And it allows you to basically interact with us during our podcast. So we have some people that are joining us right now, and hopefully we're going to get your questions actually answered on this show, but really trying to dial up the crowdsourcing component of the ultimate crowdsourced personal finance show. So with that, welcome. This is Choose FI.
You're listening to Choose FI Radio. The blueprint for financial independence lives here. If you're looking to unlock the secrets to financial independence and early retirement, you're in the right place. Stay tuned and join a community of like-minded people who are getting off the hamster wheel and taking control of their lives in the pursuit of financial independence. Choose FI, your home for financial independence online.
All right, guys, so as listed earlier, this is going to be another interactive Q&A type session. We're bringing in lots of feedback and questions, and I know for a fact that we've got one voicemail, one question asking about what to do with an emergency fund in a low interest rate environment. We have a bunch more questions teed up behind that. And to help me with this, I have my co-host Brad here with me today. How you doing, buddy?
Hey, Jonathan, I am doing quite well. Yeah, it's good to be here on our second live event, which is a lot of fun. So yeah, as you said, we're doing it at this new app called Stereo. So everybody can find that. We have a direct link set up if you want to join us every Tuesday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern. It's just at chooseupi.com/live. And yeah, it was actually pretty cool, Jonathan. Today I saw you in person, which felt
because
fantastic.
Of the stereo. We got to figure out how to get your audio working.
And it worked perfectly. I think we're up and running. But yeah,
perfectly.
Weather,
that's a different. But we're better than we were last week, and we're like, okay, we'll gain a foot, gain an inch. We're gonna stack. Aggregation of marginal gains, Brad. Yeah. It was marginally better.
It was marginally better. It's so funny because I actually just mentioned aggregation of marginal gains in a FI weekly email, just this past one. And I mean, that's such a concept that it's so important. How many times have we brought that up on the podcast? Probably 50 or 100 at this point. And you can never repeat it too often. It's these tiny, tiny little changes, right? And like in and of themselves, each one of them is almost irrelevant, but yet in total, it's the path to FI, right? It's this path to everything. It's the path to wellness, right? It's making little changes that just make your life better. And I think you and I are both trying to do this in all aspects of life. And I know health has been a big thing for you. It was nice to see the sun a little bit today, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, weather's been a little hit or miss. Spring is coming, which is great because it feels like for the last year we've been saying winter is coming. But spring is coming. We're almost there. And kind of the bad side about the aggregation of marginal gains is just because you get better in some areas does not always mean you hold on to those gains. Like if you neglect them for too long, you can backslide. And while you're less prone to that in the financial side, because you can just autopilot everything, Brad, you're talking about your health. Unfortunately, that just you got to pay more attention to it. And there's a little bit of encouragement in there. Then the finances are actually easier in some ways than taking care of your mental space, taking care of your physical health. But it is worth reminding to all of us, and I guess, in light of this conversation, take a little time for some self-care. It's the only place you have to live.
Yeah, no, it's so important. And yeah, actually, if you don't mind, I wanted to read a quote here from this FI weekly newsletter that I sent out. And it's talking about this aggregation of marginal gains. So it's this British cycling director, the British cycling team was like a laughingstock. And by implementing this concept of aggregation of marginal gains, they wound up winning like multiple Tour de France trophies and et cetera, et cetera. And it's basically said that this guy Brailsford believed that if you make a 1% improvement in a host of tiny areas, the cumulative benefits would be extraordinary. The theory of marginal gains has been credited for vaulting the British cycling team from a mediocre performer to 16 gold medals over 2 Olympics and 7 Tour de France wins in 8 years. The examples of micro-excellence used by the British cycling team are legendary in the sports world. He had the floors of the team truck painted pristine white to spot dust on the floor, because even the slightest amount of dust could potentially impair bike maintenance. I know I've read about him bringing pillows, like each individual cyclist brought their home pillow with them into hotels, because why have to deal with a bad pillow, right? Like when you could just literally bring your own pillow, just something like that. And they're saying the act alone wasn't enough to win a race or make any more than a borderline gain. But when added to a host of other small improvements, it made all the difference. And yeah, like
No,
Jonathan, go
I
ahead.
was just thinking, someone asked you, how did you get in the best shape of your life? You're like, well, anytime I was traveling in a hotel, I made sure I brought my pillow with me from home. Or someone's like, well, how did you reach financial independence? Well, I just packed my lunch. And to either of those, someone's going to look at that and be like, well, that's just not how life works. That's cute, but it's not how life works.
Right. It's
And
almost like a flippant response, right? But it's
right.
not, truly.
Right. But I mean, I think it's symbolic of, again, because you were taking care of the small things, it points to the aggregation of those took care of the big thing, right? You left no stone unturned. And yeah, it wasn't just packing the lunch, but packing the lunch gave you the space to maybe have a savings rate where there was none before. You took the savings rate and you figured out how to optimize that and invest it in the market, getting market gains where other people are setting for making the minimum payments on their credit cards. You're allowing interest rates and compounding to actually start working for you. It's that phrase, well, how did you reach financial independence? I packed my lunch and brought it with me to work every day is, a umbrella term for all of the life choices. And the type of person that's willing to take that little bit of extra time, pack that lunch every day, brown bag that sucker, and then also maybe make the choice. What does that really mean? It means that you're probably not going out to, Panera Bread during lunch every single time or whatever, the local smoothie shop around the corner. There's a lot of choices that are wrapped up in that maybe small choice. So maybe it sounds small, but don't take it for granted. It's points to a much bigger transformation that's occurred, a mindset shift that's occurred.
Right. And when you make dozens, hundreds, thousands of those small choices over and over again, they start adding up to something significant. So yeah, it's that is truly the compounding power of this. So since we talked about the health aspect, I think this is something that I've really focused on in all aspects of my life. I'm just trying to be healthier. I know that almost sounds like cliche at this point, but it's overcoming a lot of these limiting beliefs. And I think I've always had that of like, oh, I have bad genes when it comes to health. A lot of my family members are overweight, and I always said I was inflexible, and I just all of these things. Like, I think, obviously I got dealt a pretty good genetic hand in a lot of senses. I realize how fortunate I am just in life generally, but health-wise, it always felt like something I had to overcome. And I think what I've basically done was nothing revolutionary, but just these small changes. So when my family watches television at night, instead of sitting on the couch, I'm sitting on the floor and I'm stretching, or I'm doing a couple push-ups, or I'm doing some type of yoga flow that's just super simple that I'm not going to get out of breath, but I can actually just watch TV and be there with my family, but still do this. I think I'm also looking for just, I guess, sources that I trust. And I know I've mentioned many, many times Dr. Peter Attia, who I learned about through the Tim Ferriss podcast. And he has his own podcast called The Drive, which I think is fantastic. And that's kind of led me down the rabbit hole a little bit. And, just some of these things like that I didn't realize, like a lot of people, a lot of experts are now saying like one of the major factors of metabolic health is having a healthy vitamin D level. And this was something that was not on my radar at all. And I learned actually about this is kind of a cool little FI hack for those of us with high deductible health insurance plans. So if you're actually interested in doing kind of a la carte lab testing, instead of waiting once a year for your physical, if you wanted to do a la carte lab testing, there's a website called ultalabtests.com. So it's ULTA labtests, plural.com. And I was able to get a vitamin D test at my local Quest Diagnostics for basically $30,
Wow.
which was astonishing. And I realized that, yeah, my vitamin D is dangerously low. So it's something that I realized, oh, wow, you've got to get outside. You probably have to supplement. If this is as important as people are making it out to be, this is something that I'm really deficient in. So it's interesting. I think it's like an examined life, as opposed to just being unaware. So while this wasn't a free thing, it wasn't as part of my physical that was free, that was money well spent for me.
Interesting. Now, I don't I know that you don't have a medical background, but I know that you're sourcing this
Zero.
information from yes, you're sourcing this from Dr. Peter Attia and Tim Ferriss and others, and you're over time you're starting to notice the overlap in suggestions from sources that you trust and whose opinion you value. And so at some point you perceive the value to be all right, vitamin D potentially if I am running a deficit because I'm not getting enough sunshine, because I've been advised to stay indoors the last year, or because all the activities that would have me outdoors, they're not in play at the moment, right? They've been sidelined. So in the absence of those activities, there's less excuses to get outside, and your vitamin D levels, in theory, have plummeted. You check the test, and it turns out you're right. As you're listening to all these professionals say, hey, this is an important part of peak performance, what were the symptoms that you associated with a vitamin D deficiency that made you pursue this to the point that you were willing to go through the trouble of getting an a la carte test, even if it was a simple one?
Yeah, Jonathan, I think for me, I've noticed, and this again is just kind of that like examine life. It's just kind of like thinking about things that you don't normally think about, which is I am trying to notice much more often when things affect me. So I've said but that before on the podcast about certain foods I noticed seem to lead to some type of inflammation that I otherwise would have just written off as nothing. I would have never put two and two together, as silly as that sounds. So I'm just trying to be more aware. And I realized that I think I go through kind of peaks and valleys when it comes to energy and maybe during the year. So in the summer, I am brimming with energy. I pop out of bed early. I'm getting up 5 to 6 o'clock. I'm hopping out of bed. And I noticed for the last handful of months, like I am struggling to get out of bed by 7:30. And it was just one of those things. Okay, that's a mental note. It didn't mean anything, but it was just a mental note. And then when I hear one or two of these doctors that I follow talk about, oh, hey, vitamin D is really important for your overall health. Like I said, okay, it's probably worth just from like a quantified self standpoint to learn what is my vitamin D level. So yeah, I wish that I could say there was much more like involved than that, or there was a lot more level of rigor. But I think that was it. It was just kind of putting these two things together and saying, all right, this is worth the $30 for me to go out and get this tested.
Well, I think there is some data to support that vitamin D is associated with general energy levels. And I think it's kind of hard to overstate that. I mean, if I look at my own kind of place that I am, like caffeine is my last, drug of choice. It's like I've gotten rid of pretty much anything that people would traditionally consider vices, other than my sweet tooth. This is like the last one. And trust me, I am addicted to sugar. But, but other than that, I pretty much let go of everything else. And like caffeine is the one thing I hold on to. But there's this part of me that feels like maybe I've just pushed that too far. And now I'm not getting energy, but rather when I come down off of the caffeine, I'm getting adrenal fatigue. And so it's almost like just to get to normal, I need my coffee. And then as soon as it's not there, things get pretty sluggish. And it's to the point where I think, and I think everybody knows this, at some point you do need to do like a caffeine detox. But I'm even wondering, like, is my life better with it or without it? I'm willing to, talking about that examine life, what would it look like to actually get through 5 days and 7 days? And let me tell you, I rarely make it more than 2. I try to get out. It keeps pulling me back in. It's that sort of thing. And so in that context, I think there's a couple coping mechanisms that I'm looking at as I'm trying to structure my way out of this with minimal tension headaches and still having enough energy to do what I need to do to get through a week, basically. And it strikes me that, maybe vitamin D, if we're talking about energy levels, like I don't need like this excessive energy. I just need to not feel like I'm fighting to stand up in the morning or to wake up or to go through my normal task. And so I think it's really important for us to think about that. We're so used to that almost amphetamine like high that you want to get that first time you have like a Monster energy drink, et cetera. But really what I would be very happy with now is just a natural, steady energy state. One that's coming from just eating healthy foods, having a clean diet, limiting my processed sugar. And I've noticed over time, just again, examine life here, that the exhaustion comes obviously when I don't have enough caffeine on board, which is a bad side. But one other thing I've noticed is when I decrease my processed sugar, and I'm using processed sugar instead of just using the word carbohydrates because there are different, but specifically you're eating a lot of baked goods. You're eating a lot of things that have brown sugar and syrups and honeys and also all these other sorts of things added to it. When I cut those and you're going more with fibrous foods, you're going more with leafy greens, that sort of thing, I got to a state where my energy levels, I wake up in the morning fresher and I feel brighter, right out the gate. And it's something just to track down and say, do I eat? And Brad, you said this, but I just want to point out, maybe people have this as well. when you get to the place where you eat a lot of the same foods over and over again, I'm not saying that in a bad way. I'm just saying most of us follow patterns in life. Are there certain foods that you eat that always are followed by regret? Why do we keep going back to them? Like, why? It doesn't make any sense. And this is something that stands out to me. And maybe I need to look into this vitamin D as well. Although I think many people are advised, especially during the winter, just they can take a low dose vitamin D supplement with relatively low risk. And, check with your doctor. Obviously, I'm not trying to give you medical advice on the show, but it's worth looking into. And if you are deficient in vitamin D, maybe there is something to get you back to a balanced state. Dr. Apita Tia talks about this a lot, Brad. Is that a good source for you?
Yeah, that's certainly a good source. And actually, it's interesting because when these little optimizations kind of come together and you hear like different sources saying the same thing, I actually was introduced to a new podcast called the Huberman Lab podcast. So it's this guy, Andrew Huberman. He's a professor at Stanford. And his episode number 2 was actually about mastering sleep. Now, like you kind of know the 101 stuff, right? Like sleep in a dark room, sleep theoretically in a colder room than not. Like this was the 202 or 302 level stuff. And what was cool was he was talking about a way to use a certain type of meditation. It's just like a 10-minute meditation that acts almost akin to like a little supercharged sleep. And what's funny is this is literally the exact meditation I've been using for the last 2 years. So I would highly, highly recommend for you, if you're talking about energy or just to the audience out there as like a little life hack type tip, it's actually called Yoga Nidra. So it's not yoga in that traditional sense, but it's Yoga Nidra, Nidra. So just Google Yoga Nidra 10 minutes. And this YouTube video comes up from the Yoga Nidra app, and it is phenomenal. It's like getting a 2-hour sleep, basically. It's like getting like a nap. And to hear this neuroscientist from Stanford say verbatim that it is akin to getting a nap. It was like, this is what I've been saying to my wife, Laura, for the last year. I'm like, I never feel more refreshed than when I do this simple 9-minute and 48-second meditation.
Wow.
It's awesome. So yeah, highly, highly recommend it.
Okay. All right. We're going to pivot, switch gears here out of this health segment. I mean, trust me, at some point with our fight, this is something that Brad and I, it takes up a lot of our, time and attention. So that's why we talk about it on the show. We are going to go ahead and switch gears and take some questions. And Brad, can you go ahead and pull up that first one from P.O. Box?
All right. Let's play it here.
Hi, Brad and Jonathan. This is Rakesh here. I just have a quick question on emergency fund. With interest rates going low day by day or month by month, is it be okay to take little bit risk and put the emergency fund in total bond market? Thank you.
All right. Great question. And I think a lot of it have it. So what I'm going to try to do is, instead of telling you what to do with your emergency fund, you specifically in your financial case without knowing anything about it, I'm just going to talk about what my thoughts are about my emergency fund. So this is me telling you guys kind of what my mindset is for my stuff. And I hope you can extrapolate out. Maybe Brad can weigh in. There is no one answer on this. But with that in mind, let's talk about it. We have talked about the emergency several times, and we have a slightly contrarian perspective on that, I think, even between both of us. And it's evolved over time as we've gotten a chance to get feedback and information from Big Earn. I'll have an episode that we can link you guys to, and Brad will actually probably look that up now just to have the number early on. I think it was in the early 60s, Brad, but you can confirm that. And the thought is not, should you have an emergency fund or shouldn't you have an emergency fund? All of us need money to handle emergencies, but where should that be? And let me present to you the traditional problem that most of us grapple with, especially if you come in from the traditional personal finance space. A lot of people in this space say, all right, hey, save up $1,000, which is great. I totally agree with that, by the way. If you don't have $1,000 in cash, like, yes, we need to get our $1,000. But then the next step of that, all right, now you have your $1,000. Now I want you to save up 3 to 6 months of expenses in cash. Most people never get past that point. They never start investing. They are perpetually in the 3 to 6 months. They never get the chance to see their money earn money for them. I've seen people push that to the point where they have multiple years of cash and they're sitting on 150,000, 200,000, some absurd amount of money in cash. Now, it can serve different purposes, but if someone is specifically saying, I want to have a lot of money to handle emergencies, I think it's like really important for us to look at the opportunity cost that comes with that. and what is it that we're actually trying to protect ourselves against? So, Brad, that's just like my framework, and we'll obviously dive into the nuance, the opportunity costs, and what maybe some solutions might be. Do you want to add any additional thoughts onto that so that I'm representing it correctly?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's a pretty good overview, certainly. I would say that just to reiterate as often and as loudly as humanly possible, nothing you're going to say is going to mean don't have an emergency fund, don't have money saved up, most importantly. Like you said, I think some people here don't have an emergency fund or maybe think a little bit differently with your emergency fund as saying, don't save money or don't have a net worth. Like nothing could be farther from the truth and what we're trying to say here. I think that is the most important thing. Hopefully people in the FI community are saving hundreds or thousands of dollars a month, right? And ultimately are going to get tens upon tens of thousands of dollars of net worth. And I think that is where this conversation, where your opinion is going to go here, is from that place of strength, not from a place of weakness. And I think so much of the general financial advice is coming from a place of weakness, that you have to constantly conserve, that you have to constantly like hold on to every last dollar as if it was going to vanish, right? And you can't invest it. You have to have it squirreled away. And I think that's the part that is so interesting. Big Earn talked about that in episode 66. And Jonathan, you and I have actually talked about the emergency fund a lot recently. I think this is where the conversation is kind of pivoting for people in the FI community.
Yeah. So without like applying any like dogmatic rules, I think that most of us, and whether or not we have a separate basket that we're calling our emergency fund or not, most of us will benefit from, yes, having $1,000 in the bank. Yes. Most of us have to start there because the norm is to just be able to pay off your minimum payments on your credit card each month. And so going from having minimum credit card payments being resolved to actually having a net positive, net worth that's positive, even $1,000 is a big deal. Yes, we start there. I think that for the person that wants to be able to create the space and simplify their finances, most people are going to benefit from being able to have anywhere from 1 month to 2 months of expenses in cash. This is more of a cash flow play rather than even calling it an emergency fund at this point. But if you do have 1 month extra buffer on top of your 1 month cash, like that seems like pretty common sense. Some people, and it depends on what happens. It might be more, it might be a little bit less, but you're like, it's 1 to 2 months of expenses to handle this month's cash flow and have a little buffer on the other side. Now, when we're talking beyond that, now we're talking about 3 to 6 months. Some people are really going for what they go to call a fully funded emergency fund. I think this is where, in my mind, it gets controversial and where like what I would do would probably not line up with other people's direct choices. I have a net worth. I'm trying to have a significant net worth, and I want to get as much money working for me as possible. Now, having said that, what is an emergency is something where it's unexpected, and in a short period of time, you might need to be able to draw down on this money. Now, people have different categories for emergencies. For some people, a flat tire is an emergency. A $700 expense is a massive emergency. A $1,000 expense is a massive emergency. It's not an emergency for me anymore. So I've kind of it's just kind of worth pointing out that $1,000 does not make or break me in either way. It's not to say I don't place value in $1,000. It just doesn't show up as an emergency anymore. And so if $1,000 is a crisis, then you've got to be a lot more conservative with, your money, because you can't afford to not be able to cover that $1,000 emergency. So there is a point at which, as your net worth grows, you could afford to be a little bit more aggressive because you just have more space. That's just kind of like there's some nuance here, and we do not know with P.O. Box like where they are at on the spectrum, but I hope that they're able to extrapolate this out. Now, assuming that they do have this hypothetical person, by the way, this hypothetical person has a net worth, $1,000 doesn't really scare them. We got to think about what is actually an emergency for us. And Brad, this is where I think you have in the past said, and I'll let you share it. Like for me, what is kind of an emergency? Probably a car crash where my car is totaled and it's my fault, and there's like a $5,000-$10,000 of unexpected expenses. That's starting to feel a lot like an emergency. That's starting to get more in the range. For you, that's a bad week, but it's not even emergency at that point. Like what would actually be an emergency for you?
Yeah, I mean, and this is not to say that bad things can't happen to me. Obviously, that's not what we're saying here. But for a financial emergency, yeah, I mean, since Big Earn brought this to us, I have been trying to think of what would be that emergency that I would need to come up with cash in a hurry, and I really can't come up with it, that I would need to have just liquid cash sitting around. Because, I mean, frankly, just about everything can be paid for with a credit card. You have insurance for dramatic situations, and you have assets that are invested. Like in my case, I have assets that are invested that I theoretically, in a true emergency, could sell and then just transfer that money into my checking account. So,
all right, so
I
let's
guess
play this out. Let me use
yeah.
you as a case study here, and then we'll scale it down for me, because yours, as someone that is officially FI, it might not be quite as useful, but I think it's a place to start, and we'll scale it down. So Brad Barrett, who is FI, we don't need to get into specifics here, who is absolutely FI by any standard, has a $15,000 emergency. Now, in parallel to that, because I think this is Brad Barrett has his money invested in the market. The market is March of 2020, right? The market is down 30, 40%. Brad Barrett has a $15,000 emergency. How does this play out? Is the fact that you did not have your cash in a savings account at that point earning 0.045, has that proven that the idea of not necessarily having your emergency fund and savings account a bad idea?
Well, no. I mean, again, this is hypothetical, so it's impossible to know precisely the situation. But I would assume that money that I've, instead of having it sitting there in a savings account earning essentially nothing, that I would have invested it over the course of many years. And that the march of the stock market, as we've seen over its history, has made that money grow significantly. And I have huge unrealized gains in that money. I may have invested $3,000 20 years ago, and it's doubled easily twice, right? So that $3,000 could be $12,000 right now or more. It could be the full 15 that you're talking about in this hypothetical, as opposed to if I had stuck that $3,000 in a savings account, quote unquote, right, earning virtually nothing, it would be maybe, I don't know, $3,100 if I'm lucky, right? So this is the concept. And I think this is critical. And this is why we're spending a lot of time on this. Like that concept of the opportunity cost, right? What are you giving up? So this is one of those fundamental concepts in life, just to like living a better life, is understanding opportunity cost. By making a decision, I'm foregoing a whole host of other decisions. I'm foregoing other things that I could. When you go to college, you know, the opportunity cost of that is not only the tuition and fees and such, but it's the income that you could have earned at a job if you had started at 18, right? That's just for example. But I think that's a pretty stark one that people can see that in their mind. The opportunity cost of college is not just what are you paying? It's that plus what could you have earned, right? So, and I'm sure there are a host of other factors, but you know, that's an interesting way. So the opportunity cost of, hey, I want this money to be safe. I want that in my emergency fund, that $3,000. Well, I would have foregone all that growth over my 20-year adult life, basically. So I think that's kind of a cool way to look at this. So yeah, Jonathan, hopefully I answered your question there.
All right. Yeah. So this is really interesting. Brad's answer is totally right. It's a huge point that people realize. Let's say instead of, saving inside of an emergency fund until you get to this fully funded amount, you start saving inside of some sort of investment vehicle. To Brad's point, that looks like dollar cost averaging. The market spends 90% of the time at or near the top. So the likelihood of you just dumping this massive amount on one day and then having it the next day, while there are clearly examples of that, what is way more common is that you invested money slowly over time. The market went up at whatever interval it did. And then if it were to crash, again, Murphy, crash right as you were to need the money, that decline probably got it somewhere close in your worst case scenario to where it would have been if you had just kept it in the checking account making 0.01%. And this is what Big Earn says. While it is possible that someone loses money, it's way more possible that they're losing money by not doing this. So let's kind of take Brad's example of someone that, forget the market allocation or whatever, they're going to be fine. A $15,000 emergency for me that would be problematic. We could resolve it. It'd be problematic. It would be uncomfortable. And I'd probably be scrambling for a couple months just to kind of figure out how are we going to cash flow this in the most optimized way possible. And here's how I'm kind of triaging it, like in my mind. First of all, we keep a couple months cash flow. I don't think of it as an emergency fund. It's just there so I don't have to go look and make sure I overdraft or anything else. There's a couple months of expenses absolutely there. And then you have your 401ks, which are obviously out of reach. And then you have your taxable brokerage account. And inside the taxable brokerage account, you guys know that I'm a huge fan of M1 Finance. I actually allocate my pies there for different timelines, right? So long-term investments, and then like a shorter timeline investment, which you could think of, I guess, as like an emergency fund. Over the long term, like the market in low cost index fund is pretty predictable. But in the short term, that predictability starts to look a lot more volatile. And the problem is, well, to your point, the real thing is, what if you were to try to draw out right as the market were to go down? And so what I do is in this shorter timeline investment fund that I kind of, I recognize that this could be an alternative for my emergency fund. I think about this much more the way that a retiree would think about that money, and so it's in terms of my asset allocation, instead of being like 100% equities, a percentage of my money I've actually set up inside of this pie, this M1 pie, and I just named it my negative correlation pie. And this was really drawing from Frank. The only thing that really scares me is that if I were to have this $15,000 or $20,000 emergency, that were to happen at the same time as some sort of problem in the economy. And whether that be some sort of pandemic 2.0, 3.0, whether or not it be some sort of fiscal crisis, whether or not be anything, something that right as I really need this money, equities are tanking and I'm going to have to transfer this out while they're being suppressed. So for me, I don't care about stability as much. I want something that's negatively correlated to the stock market. And so my personal choice, not a recommendation, I've been exploring, what does it look like? What does negative correlation look like? And I've been experimenting around with a mixture of bonds, of precious metals, that sort of thing, things that would have the potential to go in a different direction as the stock market. Now, I'm not an expert in this space. It's not something that I can speak out with a lot of confidence, much like we just say, hey, if you just want to own the whole market, just buy VTSAX. I wouldn't feel comfortable making personal recommendations. But my thought was have a smaller pie that acts as an analog for my emergency fund and hopefully has some level of negative correlation with whatever is going on in the stock market. And that is kind of what I personally have made the choice to do. And Brad, I know you want to hop in, so I'll let you, but I do have one more slight little hack that I think I figured out that I'd like to come back to on the other side. So just bookmarking my spot.
Fair enough. Yeah, I just wanted to mention, so that episode you mentioned with Frank, that was episode 194. And Jonathan, I'm not sure if you know this, but Frank has a podcast. Frank is basically the smartest human we know. And yeah, he started a podcast a couple of months ago and actually didn't really even tell us about it, which is kind of sad. I would have loved to have talked about it on the podcast earlier in this. So it's called Risk Parity Radio, Parity, Risk Parity Radio. And yeah, he goes through just a whole different host of investing options. He talks about his portfolio and just, like you said, different asset classes to create a larger portfolio. So yeah, I mean, for those of you who are listening to our podcast and said, hey, obviously I totally understand the simple path to wealth, but I personally would love to learn more. I'd love to see what the next level is. I suspect you'll really, really enjoy Frank's podcast. So yeah, Jonathan, you should check it out.
Well, and what I love about the way Frank tackled it when he came on our show, and you just referenced 194, I believe. So choosefi.com/194 if you want to go listen to that. But was that Frank basically said he took a look at crashes that have happened over the last 20 or 30 years. Specifically, we have the 2008 and then we have 2001. And he wanted to get negative correlation. He wanted to see a scenario where when the stocks and equities go down, something else goes up. That's what he was looking at. And for me, that's what I want for my emergency fund as well. Great. I have this long-term plan for growth, but man, if it were to tank, it'd be really nice to allocate in such a way that I could get a little ride on the other side. Now, coming back to my little hack that ties it all together, that I think is like the best case scenario. Regardless of your asset allocation, when you're using inside of your taxable brokerage account, something like M1 Finance, and you guys know, if you've listened to our show any period of time, I've raved about this. I don't need to tell you more on this other than go check out one of the, we did an episode recently with Brian Barnes, and you can go to choosefi.com/M1 for a detailed write-up that we did on this. They actually give you access to a margin loan. And they have an M1 Plus. I think right now, when you sign up for it, you get like 1 year of their M1 Plus for free. Their margin loan allows you to access up to 30% of your portfolio at rates as low as like 2%. So, talking about that situation that Brad had as $15,000, $20,000 purchase, put it on the credit card, and then you're like, oh, but I don't want to sell anything out of the stocks because stocks are going down or whatever. What I would do to get that off the credit card ASAP, I would take the credit card. You got 45 days, Brad, of basically interest free on the credit card with this emergency. Towards the end of that, I would then take the margin loan off of M1 Finance, which is now taking that interest, which is free and now about to go to 25, 26%. And then I would have a 2% interest rate with this M1 margin loan. I would pay that off, and then I would be making payments back to M1 in the balance while watching to see what goes on with the market. If the market is recovering, great. If the negative correlation is taking place, great. Use that to then pay off the balance and or some combination, thereof. But that is like my little hack to not get freaked out, to feel like I have some agency in the game, to not be keeping 50, 60, 100, $200,000 in a savings account, making 0.0. And look, this is my biggest problem with this. People like, I can't map this out. We're going to have Big Earn come on and tell us how serious this is. But with the quantitative easing that's happened over the last couple of years, the money supply has been close to doubled in the last decade. Like it's 25% of all the money in the United States history was put into the economy over the last 12 months. And with the last 2 or 3 rounds of stimulus checks, I heard numbers that it was closer to 30, 35, 40%. And to tie this back to the early 1900s, your purchasing power is guaranteed to go down over time if it's in a coffee can. So just having the money there sitting, doing nothing is not without its own level of risk. Going much deeper than that would require a conversation that's above my pay grade. I'm happy to bring the experts on to talk about it. But I'll tell you that I'm not happy with just the coffee can approach. It doesn't work for me. So that is how I try to mitigate the risk to feel comfortable with it and try to get my money working for me. Great. If the savings account wants to give me a great interest rate, I'm going to use that. As soon as they stop, I'm going to get mercenary and figure out where else I can get a return. That's basically where I land.
All right, Jonathan, we got a lot of questions here, so I think we got to be a little more succinct on our answers. Let's try to get to a bunch of them. So I'm going to play one right now.
Hi, Jonathan and Brad. I love your podcast. I just wanted to ask about how the Roth 401k works. I do have a Roth IRA that I started last year after listening to you guys. And if I was to retire in about 10 years, when I hit my FIRE goal, hopefully, I wanted to know what would happen if I had a bunch of money in a Roth 401k and wanted to convert it over. Would I have to wait 5 years before I could start using the money? Or would I be able to use the amount that I put in, the $19,000 I put in every year, and go ahead and start using that immediately like you can with a regular Roth IRA? Thanks.
All right, Brad, this is in your wheelhouse. Let's put on the accountant hat.
All right. Yeah, let's gotta remember all the accounting stuff, right? So anyway, Sean Malini, the FI tax guy, we actually had him on episode 289 talking about the Roth 401k, because this is a not all that well-known option for people. So basically, I guess the most important thing to talk about here is just real quickly the difference between a traditional 401k and a Roth 401k, which is actually the same concept behind the difference between a traditional IRA and a Roth IRA. So in essence, with the traditional option, so traditional regular 401k, you are getting a tax deduction now. And when you pull the money out, it is taxable. So it's a taxable event when you pull the money out down the road in, let's say, in quote unquote retirement. Okay. Whereas with a Roth option, either 401k or Roth IRA, you are paying taxes on it now, and then it grows tax-free forever. And when you pull the money out, it is also tax-free. Okay. So these are just two fundamentally different options. Now, I'm not 100% certain about the caller's precise situation, but it sounds as if there's a Roth 401k and she's putting that money in through her job and is wondering, I guess, the 5-year waiting period that was referenced. So that's actually on a Roth IRA conversion. So that's actually something completely different. That's when you're converting a traditional IRA to a Roth IRA. So that's a conversion where you pay the taxes then. That's a taxable event. And then you cannot access that money until 5 years later. That's what we've talked about multiple times on the show about the Roth IRA conversion ladder, which is one of the best hacks that's available to people in the FI community.
But this is actually good. It sounds like bad news. It's actually good news, right? Because she doesn't have to go through that process.
Right. She doesn't have to wait at all. Yeah, you're absolutely right. So yes, there's no bad news here at all for her situation. She has the money in a Roth already. She's, paid the taxes on it originally when she made that contribution. And yeah, once she gets to basically 59 and a half, which is when you're allowed to start accessing this money penalty free, she can pull that money out tax and penalty free. There's no conversion necessary. There's no wacky stuff. I guess theoretically, you could roll your money out of the Roth 401k into, let's say you left that company, right? And you don't want the money sitting there in that company's 401k, even though, it's 99.999% sure it's safe. That's not the issue. It's just you would rather have control of that money rather than a company you used to work for, right? So you can roll that to a Roth IRA, okay? That is fundamentally distinct from that conversion, right? That's a totally separate thing. The conversion is when you go from traditional to Roth. This is just a simple rollover. It's as if you had a regular 401k, you can roll that to a traditional IRA, okay? That is at a brokerage firm of your choice, Vanguard, Fidelity, Schwab, M1, whatever it may be, right? So really, in her case, there's no issue here. It's you have a Roth 401k, you can roll that into a Roth IRA and have control over it, and you never have to pay taxes on this. So yeah, she's in real good shape.
All right. Thanks for the question.
Yeah, great question.
Hey, this is Andrew from the Choose FI team. I hope you're enjoying the show. We're going to get right back to it after these quick messages.
All right, so we got another one coming up. Let's see what Ed has teed up.
Hi guys, it's Ada from Poland, now living in Netherlands. I was thinking whether you guys consider taking a guest for the podcast from like other countries, non-American FI goers. I think it would be interesting. Thanks. Love the podcast.
Yeah, I love this. So financial independence and then the FIRE movement, it is a worldwide movement. And I know for a fact that we have listeners in pretty much every country on the planet. I mean, it's a shocking number. I actually got a geography lesson by looking at how many listeners and how many countries we had. So really appreciate the phone call. And I think it is a challenge, a hurdle, but it's one that I would happily partake in. We just have to figure out what would be the context for the show. Is it, Brad, what do you, I guess it looks like you have some thoughts as well. Like, are we taking, I think the biggest thing is people are like, most of the principles of FIRE are universal, but the tax code is what is very US centric. And you guys always spend your time like, I don't know if I can speak about the Spanish tax code or, the Portuguese tax code. I don't know if we would be able to effectively communicate there. But if we want to go outside of that, the challenges and opportunities in various countries, I think that would be fascinating.
Yeah, agreed. I also echo your thoughts that it would be hard to pick specific countries because, to your point, we can't have 200 episodes with a person talking about very specific things in specific countries. That said, we do have Choose FI local groups in, it looks like 30 to 40 different countries in the world. So if you're looking for the financial independence community and a Choose FI community in your local area, there's a reasonable chance you're going to find one. So just head to choosefi.com/local and that'll give you some options. Jonathan, we do have local groups in the US. We have hundreds of them. We have had Barney from the Escape Artists on episode 49. We've obviously had Alan Donegan on multiple times. So we do try to talk a little bit about expat taxation. I know we had David McKeegan on. That's a little bit distinct. But yeah, I guess that's my kind of top of the head thoughts.
Maybe in a few years, maybe we could get like a Choose FI Canada, Choose FI Netherlands, get a podcast that's attached to kind of the ethos of the FIRE movement and really use the local communities to help really inform that. I do think the spreading of this idea is really important. And I think your larger point is well taken. Like the podcast is a very important vehicle to spreading and sharing ideas. And if maybe we can use resources to facilitate that in some way, we can put it on the roadmap and see if it's a possibility. It'd be exploratory, but we could see if it'd be a possibility. And I certainly it'd bring a lot of joy to my heart to see that become a reality for all these places. Yeah. In the meantime, though, choosefi.com/local to find your local community. All right, man, go ahead. What do you got for us next?
All right, let's do it.
Hello, this is Gavin. Thanks so much for taking my call. Just wanted to ask about how best to decide post-FI plans. Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Nice. All right, this is going to be a lot of fun to talk about. I think my biggest, it's not a pushback because it was a voicemail. It's not an ongoing conversation. But my biggest thing is FI is a number. It's not an action, right? Nothing about being FI mandates that you leave your job. I think that's one of our biggest complaints or pushbacks on the whole idea or the name, the FIRE movement, that it ties the getting to the point where working is optional to the walking away from work, which are absolutely not one-to-one. And why you kind of hear us try to put this more emphasis on the FI component is what does the world look like when you have options and you have time? Options, time, and resources. What do you do with that time? Does that change the calculation?
Yeah, Gavin, this is it's certainly a great question. I think to Jonathan's point, it gets to the larger issue of what we're doing here. We're not just trying to get rich, right? We're not, that's but the smallest component. Obviously, having financial independence makes everything easier. And I think that's why we start there on this life optimization journey. And that's we spent the first 15 minutes talking about our health. Not 1 second of that had to do with saving money or cutting expenses or eating brown bananas or some other nonsense, right? By having some space financially, we can make choices from positions of power. And I think that is critical. And that allows us this time and space to then look at our life and figure out, what do we want to do, right? What do we want this life to look like? There's lots of different ways to really kind of sit back and just be introspective and figure out hey, what do I think I want to do with my life? What makes me happy? What do I find joy from, right? Jonathan, this reminds me of the exercise that Scott Rickens did with his wife, Taylor, way back when they were talking about, the movie Playing with Fire, right? It's what are the 10 things that makes you the happiest, right? Come up with a list, just brainstorm. And they may cost money, they may not. It's largely irrelevant. But what are those things that actually light you up? And how do you then also test things that you theoretically would like to try, right? You hear these stories of, hey, I want to sail around the globe. Okay, that sounds great. But have you ever sailed across the lake that you visited, right? Have you ever, I don't know, went down the Intracoastal Waterway or something for 100 miles? There are ways to test these things. And I think that's kind of something that I like to do is small scale testing without making wholesale life choices. So I think that's kind of a cool thing is when you have the luxury of time, you can figure out, what do you want? What do you want to do? What does life look like? And it might be fundamentally different than you expected. It reminds me of Brandon, the mad scientist, thought he was going to travel 365 days a year with his wife, Jill. And they decided that after doing that for a while, that was not at all what they were interested in. And I think that it's cool to be able to make these pivots. So yeah, Gavin, I guess my short answer to your question would be, you get to explore and you get to think about this all along the path to FI. But please, 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 whatever you do, don't just rush, eyes closed, to that moment when you're FI, when that 25 times expenses hits the Excel sheet and think that life is going to be wonderful. You need to really think about this, because the money, in the grand scheme of things, the money is the easy part. It's trying to find out what lights you up. That's the hard part.
And the whole idea of waiting till what are you going to do after you reach FI, it puts a gap there. You're just dreaming of doing it versus maybe you could just be doing it. And to give you a couple examples of that, I think the thought experiment is great. So that would be the first start, just going with Gavin's question, go through that thought experiment and then say, what's keeping me from doing a version of that right now? And the person that strikes me that is really embodying this more than anyone that I know in the entire FI community right now, just from matching up their net worth to how much they're flexing their freedom, is my brother. My brother, Andrew, who edits our podcast each week, is flexing his financial independence muscle. Not because his net worth is probably, I don't even think he has a six-figure net worth at this point. Still relatively early on in his, professional career and his savings goals and that sort of thing. But the dude has figured out what he wants his life to look like. And then he's figured out how to structure what pays the bills and what allows him to save money in a way that allows him to flex that freedom, which is why this year he reached out to people in our community, the Choose FI community, Not like, hey, I'm Jonathan's brother. Can I do this? But just literally, Andrew went in the Facebook group and said, hey, I'm very interested in learning homesteading. Does anybody have a homestead that, I could come and, room and board and I could just work on your homestead and learn the skill? Andrew also has tracked down all the maker spaces in the local city of Richmond. Andrew has explored the city to the perimeters, and he has been able to build an income for himself and a skill set for himself that allows him to have remote work and to do it on his terms. And he's not the only one. I use him because I'm, pretty familiar and comfortable with, understanding what choices he's made. But even from our guest, Bradley, and this is why we highlighted the Salesforce program so often, so early. And really the source of this, Bradley, when he came on his show, just as a guest talking about what he did, Bradley was exactly where you are, Gavin. It's like, what am I going to do once I get to FI? And it's like, well, what would it look like for me just to be able to go part-time and do it all now? And he actually ended up making more. Go listen to his story. I'll get you the episode number for that. This is a guy that's in the height of his career. He's crushing it, and he could potentially, just grind it out and get there within a few more years. He decides to take his foot off the pedal, look at the problem a little bit differently, moved into freelancing, build a business around that, ended up making close to twice what he was making while he was working full time, while being able to carve out more time with his wife and daughter. I mean, when you're willing to just say nothing is fixed, there is a way to look at this more creatively. Does the world open up? But before you even get to that point, you got to be willing to make these marginal gains. And so I'm just, I'm very proud of my brother. I'm very excited for the theme that I see with what Bradley personally is doing. And I know in our community, this is really just the tip of the iceberg, because people that are looking for these types of opportunities tend to find them. And the ones that aren't tend to not. That's just the way it works.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point. And yeah, that is not me. That's Bradley Rice, and that was episode 117. So yeah, choosefy.com/117. All right, Jonathan, we got another question. I'm going to queue it up here.
Hey, Brad and Jonathan. This is Natalie. I'm calling from Portland, Oregon. I'm listening into you live right now. I'm loving your show, and I am really connecting with this idea of really maximizing my savings. And yet I'm not sure how long I want to live in my rental and if I want to buy property. So I'm sitting on probably about, I don't know, maybe $50,000 or $60,000 cash, making very little money in savings right now. And I'm hesitant to move it into my Fidelity index funds. I've never taken money out of the stock market in my index funds before. How easy is it to put money in if I really might need it in 3 to 5 years? We'd love to hear your feedback. Thanks so much. I'm enjoying the show so much. Thanks.
Thank you. All right. So we have a question in mind. We have a lump sum of money, a pretty significant lump sum of money. And then, Brad, what was the context? Is she currently invested, or it's in a savings account? Did you piece that together?
It sounded like that money was sitting on the sideline from what I could tell. So yeah, Natalie, definitely. Thanks for the voicemail. Right. She has 60K. She's staying in a rental. So she is renting. It's not like a rental that she owns. She's renting, and she's conceivably going to buy a house. And yeah, she has this 60K. She doesn't know if she wants to move that into stocks. I guess kind of as I'm hearing it, it's all kind of part and parcel of maybe a down payment, how easy it is to get the money in and out, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay. But we do know the timeline is there. So it's how easy is it to get the money in and out? So this would not be part of a retirement account. So that means that we're not limited to whatever our employer offers. And we would have a choice then between, the three big institutional ones, which most people think of as Fidelity, Schwab, or Vanguard. And then alternatively, or in parallel to that, you kind of have your more streamlined software-based ones, which kind of give you some extra functionality. And these would be ones like Wealthfront, Betterment, M1 Finance. I mean, you guys know generally how I feel about those. But to do just a compare and contrast here, in terms of ease of getting in and out with the traditional brokerages, I think Fidelity and Schwab, and specifically Fidelity, tends to be the easiest to just kind of learn the interface, get money in and out. You can actually have a checking account inside of Fidelity. It just tends, of those institutional ones, it tends to be the easiest. On the kind of the newer version, kind of the next generation of these, there's like I said, there's Wealthfront, Betterment, M1, and also Robinhood. I just would basically strike Robinhood from the list. They've gotten so many black eyes at this point for so many reasons that unless you're just wanting to go to a casino, I just don't know what the appeal is at this point. But of the other three, I think you could make maybe a pretty compelling case for my pretty strong bias is M1. Brad, I know that you have at least you've dabbled around with Wealthfront, I believe, personally as well. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I have some money in Wealthfront just to kind of test it out. I'm a dabbler, basically. I pretty much have money invested in all of the places that you listed, just to kind of see which one which I like better. I guess I think my kind of slight different answer and wholly echo everything you just said. I think aside from just like how easy is it to use the platform, I think my answer to Natalie would be from the conceptual level. It's really remarkably easy to get your money in and out. Now, obviously, we have no idea what's going to happen with the stock market. Clearly, you could put that $60,000 in today. It could be worth 90 3 years from now. It could be worth 61. It could be worth less, right? So I am not touching that with no way to forecast up, down, sideways, whatever. But from an actual, can I pull this money out? Yes, it is your money. I think this is something conceptually that people really don't get is having a taxable brokerage account. And that's a really terrible name, but that's just what it's called. It's just a regular account with any one of those brokerages, right? This is not like having a 401k or an IRA or something that is a regimented thing that has rules with the government as far as how much you can put in, when you can withdraw, tax penalties, et cetera, et cetera. A regular brokerage account is the same as having a regular savings account or a checking account, or frankly, putting the money under your bed or in your freezer, right? Like this is your money. It's your savings. You can put it where you want. So the short answer for me would be on that part of the question is, yeah, you can put the money in Fidelity or Schwab or Vanguard. You can buy whatever you want. And if you want to sell, you can sell that day and you can transfer the money out. It would be back in your bank account about 3 days later. So yeah, I think the short answer to that is it really, really easy. Jonathan, you nailed it though, as far as like, which platforms. I know you have a bias against Vanguard's clunky 1980s style platform. So
I have money on there. It's just not fun to use. Sometimes I can't even find the login button. You would think they would make it easier to like just log in. I mean, if they asked me to do
still struggle with it.
If they asked me to like promote their sell ads for their, for their product, I absolutely would. I love Vanguard. I'm just saying their interfaces. It's not like the core products are amazing. It's a little tough to use. There's a little bit of a learning curve. So, you're starting from scratch. I'm sure this is directly resulting in you saving money in expense ratios and fees. So, they're frugal. Actually, there's another point here I wanted to mention. She brought something up that's worth pointing out to people. The stock market actually does have business hours. They are open and they are closed at certain times. And we cannot just buy and sell stocks anytime we want and have it sell or go through at that exact point in time. You have to wait till the stock market is open or closed. So in the United States, here in the US, I believe it's 9:30 a.m. Eastern time to 4 p.m. Eastern time inside the United States. That is when the exchanges are open. That's when you can put in your sales. And then this is important to note that with all of the primary ones, so Fidelity, Schwab, Vanguard, all of those, you can get an instant transaction whenever those exchanges are open. Whenever those exchanges are open, so Monday through Friday, and between 9:30 Eastern time and 4 p.m., if you want to buy or sell, you can do that. A lot of those will allow you to get instant access to any funds. So if you transfer money over from your bank account, your money's available immediately. If you were to then sell the money, like let's say you have these stocks and you want to sell and you want to get out, you are able to sell it immediately as well, as long as the market is open. But then in order to take that money out, you have to wait a couple business days for it to settle. That's what they call it. It's like 2 business days typically is the standard. Now, I wanted to point out, in slight contrast, and I can't speak to all the platforms here, but with M1 specifically, because I've said a lot of good things about it, it's worth pointing out that with M1, the way they do what they do, allowing you to get free purchases with fractional shares, they only give you 1 purchasing time a day at the standard plan. If you get their M1 Plus, of which I have, in which you get a free membership for 1 year when you enroll an account, you get 2 purchasing times. Their standard purchasing time, I believe, is at 9:30, right at the open. So if you were to go and you were to say, hey, I want to sell this, you're going to have to wait till the market opens, and then it will go through, it'll probably go through within about an hour or so. They have a queue. They do a bunch of sales all the way at once. And then if you have that upgraded membership where you get the second time, let's say you were to put in a sell order around 10:30 a.m., 11:30 a.m., it would not go through until mid-afternoon. So 3 p.m. is the second window. And so this is just like, it is actually an important distinction for people with M1 Finance. It's not a good choice for people that are trying to get in and out quickly. It's not the best choice. It's fine if you're doing it for some sort of emergency fund. You have to make a big sale. You're not particularly worried about the exact price at the exact moment. But day traders will not like this platform. I like it a lot. I understand those rules and what they have, and it doesn't bother me at all because I dollar cost average, and I just, I'm kind of in it for the long term. If an emergency were to happen, we've talked about that. But it is worth pointing out because that is a structurally different answer depending on whether you're talking about M1 versus the old institutions. And I can't answer for Betterment or Wealthfront right now. I just don't have that information in front of me.
And Natalie, as far as buying a home, I mean, clearly we can't give you exact advice for that. I would listen to episode 47 with Millennial Revolution, Christine Bryce. This is a great episode. Actually, they have a lot of resources on their website. But yeah, the episode was entitled The Cult of Home Ownership. So it's just kind of a different way of thinking about, you hear, owning a home is the American dream. And maybe it's not necessarily the right choice for everybody. So anyway, just an interesting thing. And Jonathan, we've got actually some kind of live feedback here, which is wonderful on one of the things that I talked about before with the Roth 401k. So I'm going to cue it up.
Oh, cool.
Hey, this is just a FYI. The tax treatment rules / penalty rules for rolling over a Roth 401k to Roth IRA are a little more complicated. If the money went into the Roth 401k as contributions, yes, then it's pretty simple once you roll it over to a Roth IRA. But if you did in-plan Roth conversions, there's actually a phantom 5-year clock on those in-plan Roth conversions that actually carries over to when you roll over the money to a Roth IRA.
All right. So nice little bit of clarification here. But yeah, in-plan Roth conversion. So that sounds like something very, very specific. It sounds like we got the majority of this right here, but that's just a nice little additional piece of information. And I suspect there's other things that someone would need to look up before, they actually made these choices. So as always, do your research, ask your financial advisor or accountant if you have one, and make these decisions wisely. But yeah, there's a lot of information out there on Google, but in general, very general terms, the Roth 401k to Roth IRA is pretty straightforward, but there is nuance. So yeah, thank you very much for the feedback. All right, Jonathan, we got another question coming up. So let me hit play.
Hi, Brett and Jonathan. This is Marjorie calling from Chicago, but originally from Puerto Rico. And I am definitely on the path to financial independence. And I've been trying to share this information with my family, but their main language is Spanish. And I was wondering if you have any of your resources available in Spanish, either the educational program for pre-K to 12 or any of the blogs or anything like that. Thank you for everything you do. Keep up the good work.
Oh, this is a great question. So referring to our earlier one about, kind of international guests, that sort of thing. Actually, with this specific question, I have a little bit more information to actually offer. So I got the opportunity to help Lorena, who's in our community, start a Spanish personal finance podcast. And the name of the podcast is De Peso to Peso. And her thought process was exactly, Marjorie, what you were just stating, that this needs to be in Spanish. It's really needed. And it is actually live in the universe. It's live now. And I know she's actually worked with us to take some of the resources that we were able to create and actually get all of those translated into Spanish for individuals. And I would just say that would be the place that I would start. I believe there are a couple other Spanish podcasts as well that would be a nice place to start also. And we'll continue to try to highlight these in the short term, just to make it easier for you. I've given this over to Ed to set up a pretty link just to point you directly. If you want to follow up on this today, share it with someone, just go to choosefi.com/network. And we're going to have all the links there for you so you can access all of those shows and hopefully be able to, share with you more podcasts that serve you in other languages going forward.
Yeah, that's great. And that actually sends you to a whole list of podcasts that you've actually helped start through Talent Stacker, which is really cool. So yeah, there's
maybe somebody listening to this wants to start a podcast. Maybe it is you, right? And in that case, I love podcasts, and I hope it comes through how much I love this medium, how powerful I think it is, and how early I still think it is in kind of the overarching story of what role podcasts will play in society. And so I built a whole course around that. But we did a webinar a while back, and I turned that just into a free course for people if they want to if they're interested in just kind of seeing what is our approach to podcasting, right? Like, how do we go about putting together our show and our episodes? And if they are interested in that, you can just go to talentstacker.com. There's an option right there at the header for a free podcast course. You could check that out. So, all right, this has been great, man. You got anything else?
No, this has been wonderful. Thank you guys so much for all the questions. We were able to do it here with a lot fewer technical issues, which is nice, and amazing to get some live feedback, which is wonderful. So yeah, I mean, we're really, really excited about this. And for anybody who's listening to this after the fact, you're listening actually on the podcast, join us. So just go to choosefy.com/live, and that'll link you up directly to the next live event. So yeah, thank you very much.
All right, my friends, the fire is spreading. We'll see you next time as we continue to go down the road less traveled.
If this episode was helpful to you, don't forget to subscribe. If you want to help spread the word, please give us a 5-star review and tell your friends about us. We can be found on Apple, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and anywhere you listen to podcasts. While you're there, don't forget to check out our other shows like Everyday Courage with Julian Johnsrud and Rebel Entrepreneur with Alan Downigan. If you would like a free bite-sized course to jumpstart your financial independence, check out choosify.com/challenge. Choosify is produced by Andrew Mendonza and Zachary Tan and is a production of Choosify Media Incorporated. Choosify.com is managed by Annie Sheely with William McVeigh, M.K. Williams, Melissa Lagerquist, Liz Kessler, Stephen Hettig, Kelly Black, and Jennifer Ma. And Ed T is our CEO. Thanks for listening.